Don't know, are we on? Okay, I think I see it. So I think I will proceed from here. Okay. Yeah, so let's proceed from here. Just a sec. Oh yeah. So I guess maybe Michelle can mute and then we can start.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so guys, sorry that we have started late, but we have started nevertheless. And so, just a second. Yeah. Yeah, so thanks again for joining us for an African debate session. And we are continuing with this session of, I guess we call it the Black Lives Matter session. So we are talking about this phrase that has become very common, and we want to look at some of the issues that are making us, or at least led to the Black Lives Matter sentiment. And so the transatlantic slave trade, we want to discuss it in light of a Christian perspective, secular perspective, and also maybe look at what the African traditional religious implications are. So because we are already very late, we will start with the Christian perspective. For 15 minutes, he'll give us an opening statement on what Christians think about what led to the transatlantic slave trade, what the consequences have been, and how we can move on from a Christian perspective. And then he'll also try, I guess, talk about the naturalistic perspective and also the African traditional religious perspective. So we can start whenever he's ready. We'll start the timer. I see Ben is muted.
Yeah. I had muted, but I hope I am audible enough, isn't it?
Yeah, yes, you are audible. You can start sharing whenever you start talking.
Okay, so
Start timing.
all right, let me just share my screen here, and you will tell me if it is visible on the other side, so that we can get into it right away.
Yeah, it's very visible. You can start. Oh, sorry, Ben, I think you're muted. You started speaking? Oh, Ben, you started speaking. You're muted.
Yes, Charles.
Okay, I think now. Now you're okay.
I had an...
Okay, you can start again.
Okay, so and the screen is good, eh?
Yes.
Okay, so just allow me to do this, and then I'll be good. Okay, so the transatlantic slave trade, this is the topic of our sharing today, and just trying to think through and what is the Christian response really over this matter. So I will begin as a way of introduction by stating what I have termed the moral argument against slavery. And I think we can rightly apply that to transatlantic slavery. So this is my argument, even as I get to the discussion today, that number one, every moral law has a moral lawgiver. And from our experience, that is what we know. There's no moral law that doesn't have a moral lawgiver. Every prescription has a prescriber. Number two, there is an objective moral law. Because if there wasn't any objective moral law, then we have no basis of judging whether there was anything wrong with the slave trade or not. It will just be a matter of opinion. And okay, if there is a moral law, then we know that there must be a moral lawgiver, because we cannot have a moral law without a moral lawgiver. Since there is an objective moral law, the transatlantic slave trade was a violation of this moral law. Now, if the moral law has a moral lawgiver, then the transatlantic slave trade was a violation of the dictates of the moral lawgiver. Therefore, the transatlantic slave trade was evil by the moral laws, by the moral lawgivers' dictates. And that is the point that is something that all of us have in our minds even as we begin this sharing today. Now, let me begin by giving a brief historical context on this whole issue of the transatlantic slave trade, because this is where we are focusing our discussion today. And slavery existed all over the world from ancient times and still exists even today in some forms. Now, slavery in Africa goes back to ancient times. It was widespread throughout the continent of Africa, and it was taking different forms. And these were the forms. There was debt slavery, where someone was enslaved because they had a debt they had to pay, and they were not able to pay by their means, so they had to enslave by themselves, and their work was sort of means of paying for that. We have the war captives, military slavery involved warriors having their masters, and also we have the slavery from prostitution, which was again widespread in some regions in Africa. Now, some of the kingdoms which were involved in slave trade, just want to go through them quickly. We had the Asante Kingdom, which is actually in the present day Ghana, and these people, they actively participated in the slave trade. And later, as we will see that as we talk about the transatlantic slave trade, they were the one exporting slaves to European merchants. But mark you, it is something that existed before the coming of the white men, and the profits they had contributed to their wealth and their influence. So that is the Asante Kingdom. And we also have this kingdom, that is the Dahomey Kingdom, a modern day Benin. These guys also sold thousands of people to European traders, and their money went, of course, into their own economic interest. And their city, Abomey, was a major slave trading center. And then we also have an empire called the Oyo Empire, which is now southwestern Nigeria, which also played, which then played a significant role in slave trade, and they facilitated the capture and the selling of enslaved individuals. And the empire's wealth grew because of this. And we have the kingdom of Wida or Waida, depending on the kind of school you went to. So this was another powerful West African state, which is actually still was located in the present day Benin. And the rulers of this kingdom actively engaged in slave trade, profiting from the sale of the captives. Now, I was just giving a small backdrop that slavery existed in Africa even before the coming of the white man. And so This transatlantic slave trade, which actually began in the 16th century, was driven by this reason. One, it was driven by political reasons and economic reasons. And the pioneers of this slave trade were actually the Portuguese. They are the ones who are the pioneers of this slave trade. So now, what happened is that transatlantic slave trade supplied a market for a business or for something which was already existing. So the Africans themselves enslaved their own people and sold them to the Americas. Of course, we have those ones who were taken by force, especially as the trade continued to grow. So they were sent as they were the slaves were given in exchange for commodities like sugar, coffee, and all those things. But they worked in plantations and homes in Europe. So the transatlantic slave trade only served to fuel the slavery that which was already in existence in Africa by that time. So what was the impact of this? What was the significance of the transatlantic slave trade? One is that slavery denied people their freedom and rights to live as human beings. The slave trade promoted wars on the home of origin, as war became a means by which people got more slaves to sell to the slave merchants. So Africans began fighting amongst themselves to get slaves so that they can give to sell to the merchants. And we have the brutal conditions during the Middle Passage, which led to the loss of many lives, actually some of them committing suicide. And then, of course, that means there was a decrease in the manpower or in human resource, which affected the productivity in Africa. And then we had the European nations, especially Portugal, Spain, Britain, and France, which are actually the nations which came late and also profited from these. So they immensely profited in slave trade because it actually fueled the economies and contributed to the growth of industries. We also have the issue of culture blending, because now some of the aspects of the African culture were blended with the Western culture. I think that is what gave rise to the languages like the Voodoo. And of course, we have still some African countries which speak foreign languages. Now, another question to ask is, was the Bible used to justify slavery? And the answer is yes. But how was it used to justify slavery? Now, white people claiming to be Christians have frequently taken verses of scripture out of context to justify the most despicable acts. And as much as this is true, genuine Christians condemned and forced slave trade from the beginning and finally led to its abolition. And I just put this line here, that I can do all things through a verse taken out of context. And that is true. You can virtually do anything with a verse taken out of context, and that means all things. But a good thing can be misused, just as like the Bible was used in some cases to justify the transatlantic slave trade. But while the reasons were strictly, while the underlying reasons were just greed, political and economic reasons. Now, it is also important to mention that the state also took advantage of the Bible to further their own interests, which were purely unchristian. So we had the states which took advantage of the Bible and furthered their own interests, which are purely unchristian. Now, I don't have time to go into all those details, but I think one of the verses that was actually used was this, and I think this will be important for me to address in passing. That is Genesis 9:25, where the Bible says that he said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall be all his brothers." And this is related to the whole story of Ham seeing the father naked. So some people used this verse to say that Africans are the Hamitic descendants who are cursed, therefore liable to slavery. And that is what they said. Now, while Africans might be descendants of Ham, this verse says it is actually Canaan who is cursed here, and not Ham. Again, it is important to recognize that there is no evidence from Genesis that the curse has anything to do with the skin color. So in other words, In other words, this was just but a false justification, but this is just but one of the many verses. But it's also important to note that the UK and the US were not.
Left,
Sorry?
5 minutes left.
Okay. So it was also important to note that the UK and the US were not the only countries practicing slavery, but we have many of them, and actually it will surprise you to know that Egypt was actually the first people to enslave the Israelites and all that and all those. Now let me just move to the whole issue of abolition. From the beginning, as much as we have people who got involved in this trade, and we also have got some Christians who were involved in this trade and all that stuff, but this thing really bothered the conscience of many, and the slaves who were in the monasteries and nunneries were actually treated with justice and humanity, and the people who did this tried to convince others in vain. But there were efforts to abolish transatlantic slave trade, beginning from St. Anselm, that is 1033 to 1109. He tried, this was the Bishop of Canterbury, he tried to suppress this business before even it actually began. And there was a lingering debate between the state and the church. We have Pope Paul III, who issued his Sublimis Deus, declaring that all peoples are human beings and have the right to their freedom and must not be enslaved. We have our own African guy, Afonso I of Congo, and this guy was tutored by Portuguese missionaries, and he actually was aware that slavery is evil in itself, and he tried to fight it. But of course, some other chiefs who were benefiting from this trade rose up to oppose him. And there was an agitation to end slave trade by around 1776, and we have the Quaker Church rising up and the post-slave trade. They declared that it violated the golden rule of Christianity. They even went to an extent of expelling some people holding slaves. We have the American Methodists. We have the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church by 1818. We have the Catholic Jesuits who did not even tolerate slavery. And then we have many of them, but I just want to mention a power which or a name which really got involved into this and finally led to the abolition of slave trade. And this was a guy by the name William Wilberforce. And when he began this was an evangelical or a Christian who was a parliamentarian. He's the one who began this motion that finally ended the slave trade. But we have other evangelicals like John Newton, John Wesley, Thomas Clarkson, and all those. You can check them out. But let me finish this presentation by saying this. I've run out of time. But while Christians did not start the Atlantic slave trade, they fought its abolition. Why? Because they believed in this. Sorry?
1 minute left.
Okay. Because they believed in these things. That one, all human beings are made in the image and likeness of God, hence worth of dignity and respect. Number two, it was morally wrong according to God's standards to treat human beings as means to an end and not as an end in themselves. Therefore, they saw morality as transcendent and as an unchanging absolute standard rooted in God. Therefore, we also need to call our fellow Africans to account for and to responsibility for the wrongs that they actually did. And another thing to mention is that the misuse of Christianity does not negate its truth, and Christianity accords man the greatest dignity that no other worldview can give. And I believe the reason as to why the transatlantic slave trade is wrong is because it violated the intrinsic worth that human beings had, and that can only be given by God. Thank you, Charles.
All right, thank you. And you had like some 20 seconds left, but thanks for finishing in time. And so just before we get, Michelle can just get herself ready. Michelle can get herself ready just before we get her presentation. just wanted to share that so that the speaker is from Apologetics Kenya, and that's Apologetics Kenya. In this Linktree, linktree.ee/Apologetics Kenya, you can get all the stuff that Apologetics Kenya is doing. They are everywhere. So like, just look up Apologetics Kenya. Now we will have kept an atheist perspective, or should I say naturalistic perspective on the whole issue from Michelle. I'm hoping she's ready. Can have her audio and video on, ready to give her 15-minute opening statement on the topic. I hope she can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
So whenever you start talking, I will start timing the 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm ready to start.
All right.
Yes. Now, we'll start with, I'm Michelle Nekesa. I am the Secretary of Atheists in Kenya Society, and I'm very excited to have such progressive conversations. So, thank you. And let's get started, okay? So I think there's no need to reiterate or to be redundant. As Ben had said, the historical context of the transatlantic slave trade when the Europeans, specifically Portuguese, would come to the African coast, the West African coast specifically, to trade people for an array of products from textiles, firearms, and a lot of other things. We would consider they were ahead of us, or they were ahead of our times in that perspective. So speaking from a naturalistic perspective, of course, and if we take natural science, or if we bring evolution into perspective, the fitter one will always survive, right? If it's a man-eat-man society, someone will try to dominate someone, because in this infinite world, somehow the resources are still finite, right? So that brings into perspective why they would come from their end and be like, we have this, we have more weapons than you. If I'm in a sword fight, and then someone pops up with a gun, they have a few steps on me, right? So that gave them, of course, superior competitive advantage. And I like that he talked about how there's a part we played in this as Africans, as from all the kingdoms, right? Because if you read any literature on that perspective, they would get Africans to go bring other Africans so that they're traded. It's a barter trade for humans, and again, the products I mentioned before. Now, speaking or representing an atheist society, I call myself a secular humanist. I believe every human being is accorded as soon as you're born. As soon as you're born, you need to be humanized, and I'm using the word humanized not very lightly, because we live in a very, I don't want to say oppressive, but there's an intersectionality of systems in this world that makes dehumanizing a set group of people easy. And in that perspective, the dehumanized persons or peoples who are the West Africans that were being traded. Because in what capacity, with what audacity are you acting? Because essentially, if I sell you to someone, as the Portuguese and the other Europeans were doing, it's the subtext of which is that I am superior to you. And if we look at it, that's what led us to the racial inequities and injustices we're observing right now. But that's a topic for another day, because that's as far along. We can even go further to prove why right now we have white supremacy, because it's a capitalistic society. If you have more resources you've acquired cheaply, or even better, it's almost free, because if they're slaves, they're not being paid and compensated for their labor and time and skills, then you're going to build your economy, use people, dump them, breed them to create better, stronger slaves. And then we can come around and talk about how African countries are third world and underdeveloped. When we know why we're here, we were not sleeping, because it's easy to argue oh, it's a third world country, they could have done this. But there's a perspective to it. What was done to our people? What happened? How did we get here? What is being done to our resources even when now? But neocolonialism is not the point of this, but it's still a consequence. It's a snowball effect of what is happening during this, as we are speaking, transatlantic slave trade. So every human deserves to be respected. They need their dignity, integrity, and everything respected. And it is utterly unacceptable, regardless of your race, your gender, the resources you have, the power dynamics in the community you have with people. That's totally unallowed or unacceptable. So that's my first argument. My second argument, as an effect, let me term it as an effect, is there's a term I like to call intersectionality. I don't know when or how it was coined, but it's how systems of oppression are intersection each other. For example, if you look at, and when I was thinking about it, I was writing it in my notes. If you look at slave trade and the effects of this category of people selling or bartering with these kinds of people, there's other effects that arose from that. Like I said, there's the white supremacy, the racial inequity. And even if you look, I do not, just to prove my point, if you've been to a restaurant and you see the difference in customer service between you, and I'm speaking as a Kenyan in Kenya, in Nairobi, right? So you're in your country where we are dominantly very Black or African society, but you're treated differently as if you're somewhere else. And I'm not saying it would be better if you're somewhere else, but it does not make sense, even in the least. There's no way to understand it, comprehend it, or justify it. And the same principles that these people used on the slave trade are the same principles of oppression we see in the classicism structure. There's patriarchy, there's religion, there's the illusion of meritocracy, which I would like to assume does not exist, okay? Because if you've amounted or accumulated this amount of resources and you're richer than other people, you have access to knowledge that other people have not been allowed to have, of course, by you, because it's counterproductive to your interests. Then there's an illusion of, we could even argue it's an illusion of democracy and meritocracy. That if in the same economy, if in the same community, there's someone with 100 million laborers that they do not need to compensate, and someone has zero, if anything, they are the slave. What does that amount to? And there's subtext to this. Like right now, as we can see, there's colorism from it. We can see when people are fighting corruption, and there's the subtext of they're not really fighting corruption, they're fighting that corruption does not help them, that they're not benefiters or beneficiaries of a very corrupt system. So while it's inhuman, and again, I like what Ben said. He said, I don't say slavery has always existed, but throughout nature, we can even see in the animal kingdom, the stronger ones will always subdue the weaker ones. So I am not saying Africans were the weaker ones, but there were certain disadvantages we had at the moment. But also I would like to call lack of loyalty to our self-interests, because had we been our people, and again, it's a term of semantics and stuff, but how are we selling our people? So we have to look at how complicit we are in this, and a way to move forward. Oh, and another thing we do not talk about is the social and economical effects and consequences on individual structures, individual peoples, social structures and families, those that had to be matriarchal because the men in the community had been taken out to go provide labor in other places, the economic effects where we're still suffering till today, right? Even when they came and settled, we can even see it in Kenya, right? When all the best places, there's other sides of this city where you go and you think you're not in an African or a Black country. Everybody is color, everybody is brownish, black, white, Arabic. Of course, there's going to be Black people, but sometimes it's even Black people that are not Africans. So what does that communicate to us? And it's not even conscious. It's not even on your conscious mind or your cerebellum, as we like to call it. It's what does that communicate to your subconscious? Then we'll be raising a community and a generation of people that do not believe or do not know. There's lack of representation in certain aspects, and that's only as Black people. We have to look at as now speaking as a Black woman, right? When you look at politics all over the world, and it's because of the systemic oppression and the change in power dynamics that happened, that now we're playing catch up. And it's not necessarily of searching or hunting for a wild goose. But again, if someone, by the steps and the advantages they collected before, centuries before, it's not a fair game. How do we level the playing field? And so that's why I want us to understand the interconnection between all these systems. For as long as one party, for as long as Christians are oppressing other people, for as long as we are not, for as long as there's transphobia, homophobia, capitalism and the bad effects of it, there's classicism and the effects of it, elitism, the colorism we are facing, where we want to do, because our beauty standards are very Eurocentric, again, a consequence of colonization, because if you come to a country and you want to rule it, you want the standards of life to, the standard of everything to imitate who you represent. And in that is a Euro person, a European, right? So, and even the racial inequity, again, case in point is Africa. We could do this all over the world. We could go to China and still get case studies. We could do America, which would be a good one. We could do UK. We could, again, everywhere. It's still systemic, right? So we have to start individually, because it's so easy to say, oh, it's a big problem. I'm just one person in a system that does not like me, whether you're a gay, Islamic person, it doesn't matter, for as long as you're considered an anomaly in the society, because the fundamental principles of all these systems is other people being more human than others, which does not make sense on whichever basis, be it money, be it color, be it you have melanin or not, you're an albino, you're short. There's no variable, there's no demographic of people. And that's why we are all humans. I think that's what we forget. So if there could be a way that...
4 minutes left.
4 minutes?
Yeah, to the openings, to the end of your opening statement.
Okay. So for as long as our women are not safe, for as long as all minorities are not safe, we will not all be safe. Because all the systems are interconnected, the forms of oppression, the people that benefit, the 1%, I like to call them the 1% and the 99%, right? So the only one way we can solve this is being together, the middle class, which however you want to categorize it, we all need to come together. And we have to be okay with talking about this. Because I don't know if it's the African, I don't know if silence was baked into us or we've been socialized into it, but there's a fear of talking about what matters, even just asking the questions. Because sometimes the convo doesn't even have to bring solutions. It just starts by healing, by creating safe spaces where we know this has happened to us, we know the consequences we are facing, economic, financial, structural, systemic, the power dynamics of a family as a consequence of women that didn't get a chance to empower themselves economically. And so what can we learn from this, and how do we move forward, solving all the small forms of oppression? We start individually by, just because I'm a secular humanist and an atheist or a spiritualist, I have no basis, I have no autonomy to segregate and discriminate someone else based on their beliefs or based on where they went to or their status in society. So slavery was most definitely morally wrong, very human. If you're speaking as a humanitarian, I would even have to use more unforgiving words or more politically incorrect words. And as Africans, as a person that's very passionate about amplifying and telling our own stories to the right people through the right perspectives, because if you read enough history, you realize history is the perspective of the winner. So if for a person, I remember the other day I was reminiscing about how in primary we'd learn, like, Victoria was invented by I don't know which white man, I don't care to remember, in 1814. What does that tell our children? What do you mean? The Africans that lived there in 1813, what did they see? Why are our stories still written and told from a white perspective, despite it being taught to Black kids, to African kids? So we need to go back to, and I hope any African spiritualist coming would talk about this. We need to go back to our roots, our sources. We need to remove the whitewashing of our culture. We need to even find out, is this our culture, or there was enough optics and PR done for us to believe that? So, and I hope we take because we're still colonized. I hope we know that. We like to call it sweeter, more politically correct names like neocolonialism to remove the effect, but we are very much colonized. It's just that, like a virus, it's mutated into something that has adapted in the environment. So because we are Oh, okay, thank you. Because we are okay living with it does not mean we need to survive. It's time as Africans we thrive. We need to believe we can do this. We need to fix this not only for ourselves but for our future generations. And I think that is
all right. Thank you very much. So that was the opening statement from the atheist perspective from Michelle, and thanks for that. And also, just before we proceed to the next session, which is the cross-examination, I just wanted to share something, which is just a second. Wait a sec. Alrighty. So just wanted to share that Michelle is from the Atheists in Kenya Society, and so like she was just giving us the I guess an atheist perspective on the issue. So you can find the Atheists in Kenya Society online. Yeah, you can just go. That's atheistinkenya.org. So now I just want us to. So I guess Michelle, maybe you can get back on with your audio and video. So now we want to get to a time where we ask questions, and we'll start actually with Michelle asking questions if there are any questions that she has for Ben. So like it will just be maybe the first like 3 minutes or so. I guess I can make it 2 actually. The first 2 minutes or so, it will just be Michelle maybe asking questions from what Ben asked or Ben presented, and Ben can maybe give some very short replies. And then after like 2 minutes, we will switch, and then Ben will start asking questions on what Michelle has presented, and then Michelle can respond, and then we will see whether we can continue with the discussion or get into the Q&A. So I will just, whenever Michelle starts asking a question, I will time. So the 2 minutes is inclusive of the responses from Ben, so it will have to be like a bit more quick, so that we can be able to get as many questions in and as many responses to the questions in like 2 minutes. So Michelle, I'm waiting for you to start asking your questions before I start the timer for 2 minutes.
okay. Hi Ben. So
Hi.
sorry. So I think you even mentioned it.
I missed your words a little bit.
Oh, okay. Hi. I was just passing greetings to you. Good evening. So I think you even mentioned that in your argument, the role of Christianity in not only just the slave trade or the role of Christianity and specifically even religion in colonization of Africa, now not necessarily just West Africa. So I'm asking you from an African Christian perspective. I think you're an African Christian from what you've mentioned. Isn't it a bit complicit knowing what that system was used for your people? How do you negotiate the two? How do you become an abiding Christian while also being aware of what was done to your people by that? And the second question is, okay, if the oppressor and the oppressed are praying and serving the same God, whose prayers are being answered? Because if I come to your country and castrate your men and rape your women, and then I tell you, do not worry, happy are the poor, and you do not need to worry about this material or physical life, because this is just a journey to transcend you into a destination you need. How do you reconcile that? Because if, again, not to say science is better only, but if we're looking at it from a science perspective, only one of those truths can be true. It can only be mutually exclusive, because there's no duality. While truths can coexist, there's no duality here where the oppressed and the oppressor's prayers are being answered by the same entity or by the same deity or God. So how do you? Oh, okay, okay.
So
So
maybe you
that,
can just finish up on that question and then he responds.
oh,
Hopefully, we can
yes.
get in more shorter
And,
questions.
oh,
Be
okay.
more.
Oh, and what do you think the Christian system or institution, what do you think the Christianity institution can do as a way to retribute the damage that has been done to Africans on the basis of religion? That's all.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. Thank you for. I think those are very good questions, and I really appreciate that, especially that you're my sister from the other side. So I really appreciate that. So all right, let me begin by addressing your first question. How do I reconcile the issue of being an abiding Christian when I fully know that Christianity was used to oppress my own people, and actually agree with you on that to some extent actually Christianity was used to support slavery, and I think I've actually talked about that. But if you look at it closely, and I think I mentioned it, is that when you look at the interests that drove the slavery and colonization and all those things, the interests were not religious for that matter, but the interests were merely political and economical. And therefore, Christianity to some people seemed to be the best way of supporting or justifying their views. And it was actually used that way. And I don't agree, and I disagree with that completely, because that is a total misrepresentation of what really Christianity teaches for that matter. And the reason as to why I am a Christian today is while it was used for bad reasons, as I had mentioned in the slides before, it doesn't negate the veracity or the truth of the faith in itself. So to me, it is the question of is it true? Yes. So if it is true, then as an honest person, I want to believe it as much as it has been misused for bad ends. And actually, good things get used for bad ends. All right. And then another issue of the oppressor issue, that how can God answer the same prayers for both the oppressed and the oppressor? And I think the assumption there, the assumption in your question is that these guys did pray to God, and sort of God approved or stamped their prayers, and therefore they came down here to justify and oppress the people. And I don't think that is actually true, and that is inconsistent with what actually the Bible teaches. And as I had mentioned before, that God has given man dignity and worth, and He calls everybody to respect and treat every human being not as a means to an end, but as an end in themselves, because He has created them in His own image. Therefore, no human being should be violated by any standards whatsoever. And I think He also mentioned that. And then the issue of how can the Christian institution probably come in to mitigate what has already happened to us. One of the things I will say, and to my brothers and my sisters, is that one, we ought to agree that Christianity was actually used for the very wrong reasons, and we should be ashamed of that. And what I will say is that let us go and interpret Christianity for its truth, and then apply the truths the way they are supposed to be applied. And when we do that, we'll be living in sync with what really God says, and let us minister to people's hearts and bring
Ben?
Him to. Thank you.
And Ben, you can now ask a question, and then we can try and also get more questions from both sides in and more responses, because we have only 5 minutes left for the discussion and cross-examination. So if we can be able to at least speak at least 30 seconds each, so we can get in more questions and responses in that 5 minutes from both sides.
Okay. So, Michelle, my first question comes to the issue that you talked about. As a naturalist, you did you say you believe in Darwinism? I don't want to misrepresent what you said.
I do.
I want to be accurate. Okay. So one of the things that Darwinism teaches is survival for the fittest, right? It is a survival of the fittest. So the fittest will survive, and actually Darwin mentions this in his own sort of in prediction of the white races. Talks about some races will be dominant and overcome others. So I will say, if that is the logical conclusion of Darwinism, then is there really anything wrong with the white man subjugating the black man, if that is the logical conclusion of that? And then you said when people are born, they're supposed to be humanized. So my question is, are people born human, or are they supposed to be humanized? And by what standards are they to be humanized if they have to be humanized in that matter? The last question, because of time, is if slavery is morally wrong, then by what standard? Yeah. Thank you.
All right, so I can answer that. So I'll go to your first question where you were saying the logical conclusion of Darwinism, and if it's true, it is logical, yes, but they can both coexist, right? While it's still being logical, that's not the dominant ones, or for example, right now we are a very capitalistic society, right? So the traits that matter are being shrewd, being opportunistic, being knowledgeable, because we are that is the new gold, as we all have been told by the technology-driven world, right? So what they can't coexist, it does not, when we are saying the survivor the strongest will definitely survive, it does not mean, or it does not equate to us going to sell each other. Because I've already said that is wrong, but the even wronger part is the justification of it by using systems like religion. Because especially when you say that you can say Christianity is a good thing that was manipulated by bad people, but we can sit here and discuss verses in the Bible that says slaves obey your masters, right? So while I'm not saying Christianity has not its good stuff, it has held people's morality. There are people that are only inherently good because they know the negative consequence of not abiding. There's also the parts where I think it's Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 20. I don't want to misquote it, but I know there's a verse in Deuteronomy that tells slaves you have to obey your masters the way you obey the Lord. And what does that tell? And if you take such, we could say it's contextual, what are the circumstances with it? But even just objectively as a sentence, what does that say? So while it is logical, it only makes sense, because think about it. If it's a finite world and you all need resources, at some point you're going to have to eat each other, but the justification of it, because you can bullshit us, but own up to it. You're saying we did this. Because if you even look at how African literature is wrote in the US and Britain, it's always written in a they saved us. We were primitive. So it's one thing to do a wrong thing. It's another to try to whitewash history as saving us, as doing things to us that, because if I take your tooth, okay, if I give you a tooth and I take your head, then how do I write and say I saved you from a toothache? It does not make sense. And sorry, can you remind me your second question, please?
You mentioned of the issue of when people are born, they're supposed to be humanized. So my question was, are people born human, or do they need to be humanized? And if they are to be humanized, by what standard? Yeah.
Oh, okay. People are born humans, okay? Oh, okay. So people are born humans. We're all, at least that we can all agree, we're all born humans. But there are systems in the world created to dehumanize some people. We could say Black women are dehumanized in other parts of the world. Even in Africa, we're still doing it for women. We could say homophobic people are dehumanized when it starts questioning their humanity because they're different from us. Because in what capacity and with what power are we acting, saying, because you're taking the route I'm not taking, you're not human? Because dehumanizing is and if you study serial killers literature, the one thing you do after dehumanizing someone is you literally think you own their lives. You literally see them as might as well even just be a cup you can break. So it is not our point to dehumanize people on the basis of racial differences, class differences, status differences. So yes, we are born humans, but in the course of our lives, our humanity is not respected by certain systems. Your third question, please. I hope I've answered your second.
Yeah, and we can maybe because of time, we can just have that last one to be responded to, and then we get to the rebuttals.
Oh, please. Okay. Remind me your third question, please.
Okay, you in your presentation you mentioned as transatlantic slave trade as being morally wrong.
Yes.
So my question was, by what standard do you judge it?
Okay, good question. And first of all, morality as a matter is very subjective, right? Because I'm sure if we get people that benefited from it, they could argue, oh, it's morally right if you're ignorant and I know stuff and I can take charge of you. If anything, it makes sense because again, capitalism rewards that. But on the regard of what we did to each other, when I come to a village in, like when you say the Dahomey Kingdom now, when we used to live intercommunally, when I come and take my people, because I've seen new fabric, I've seen new spices I've never seen, and because I want that, I'm choosing these products over the people I've been growing up with, the people when we as Africans say it takes a village to raise a child. So on that basis of us doing it to one another, because it's very convenient to me to argue it from the perspective of it was morally wrong for the white people to do this, or the Europeans, that's a more accurate term, to do this. It's also just convenient. It's me just not necessarily justifying, but it only makes sense if you get slapped to say it's morally wrong. But what complicity did we play in? So that's the basis I'm playing on when I say it was morally wrong for us doing that, and we're even still doing it right now. But that's not the context. I hope I'm answering.
Oh, yeah, and it's a nice conversation, but now we have to get into the rebuttal section, which will be 5 minutes each. So in the rebuttals now, you can maybe respond uninterrupted to anything that you feel needs to be addressed. And so we will start with Ben, his 5 minutes of rebuttal. And so for those who joined us, we're talking about the transatlantic slave trade, what led to it, what it actually, what the consequences were, and how we can move on. So Ben, your 5 minutes of uninterrupted rebuttal starts now, or when you start speaking.
Right. So thank you for that. Just want to mention a few things, and I'll begin from the last point that Michelle mentioned on the issue of morality, and she said something that morality is subjective. Well, if morality is subjective, by subjective, I want to understand that it is a matter of opinion. It is something where you think it is right, and I also think it is wrong, let's say. So if morality is subjective, then it only means that slavery was wrong according to Africans, but it was right according to the white men. And therefore, that means we have no basis of judging them if morality is subjective for that matter. So we only have the basis of judging them if morality is objective, and that means that it applies to all of them. And my argument is, if morality is being objective and it applies to all of them, then it means that whatever the white men did to the black men, it doesn't matter. It is wrong, and it doesn't matter what the blacks think, and it doesn't matter what the whites think, because by by the standards, by the issue of morality being objective. And I believe morality can only be objective if it is rooted in the nature of God. And also one thing I appreciate about Michelle is she agreed that the logical conclusion of Darwinism is that the strongest will actually be able to survive. And I really don't think she answered that question well. But if the logical conclusion of Darwinism is that the strongest will actually survive, then it seems to me that the white man seems to be the one who is strong on this matter. And if he has to survive by enslaving some Africans, and that is the logical conclusion of Darwinism, then we don't have any reason of pointing fingers to them and telling them you are wrong. It just could be that it is a race, the fittest, which is actually trying to survive for that matter. And also, I think another thing that I will want to say is this: that the only thing that I think makes sense to me is that human beings have got an intrinsic worth. That is both the African, that is both the white man. And I believe, and I had, as I mentioned this before, this is what motivated
2 minutes.
the Christians then to fight for the abolition of slave trade. Why? Because they believed that human beings are created in the image and the likeness of God, and morality is not a matter of opinion. It is not subjective, but it is objective, and therefore, by God's standards, we can be able to judge them as being wrong. So it doesn't matter who they actually say. And so, I believe that Christianity gives a person a dignity and worth that they don't get from anywhere else, including Darwinism. And I believe it also gives the proper diagnosis of the problem of humanity, that really the problem with the white man and the problem with the African men who enslaved our own brothers and then sold them to the market. And when even our fellow Africans try to stand up and fight, fellow Africans oppose them for that matter. And I believe the diagnosis that Christianity gives is that the problem of man is actually sin, and is only Christ who is able to save and transform the heart, and that is what we need. Thank you.
Oh, you already finished. Okay, so I guess Michelle, you can get in and start your one and only rebuttal. So whenever you start speaking, I will start timing the 5 minutes, and then after this, we will respond to the questions in the comments.
Okay. Good points, Ben. Good points. Very eloquent, informed. So I like them. And again, I'll have to go back to when I say that's why we need to humanize people, because one of the things that made the white man confidently colonize as he believed he was right, because they did not see us as humans. That's why when you look at racist videos, they still refer to us as monkeys and gorillas. Because we've seen all the videos. We've even seen when they would be in their parliament or the Senate saying it's their God-given right, right? So, and again, what's funny, yes, you say to them it was right, and I agree, and to us it's wrong. Why? The subjectivity of it. Based on the side of the slap you're on, you're not going to be on the same side. And I like that you said it doesn't matter what you think and it doesn't matter what they think. You are so right there, because again, we are a capitalistic society. So the thoughts, the knowledge, the opinions of people that only truly matter and hold effect are who? The people that hold resources in their hands. And who are these people? More often than not, we even see it in Kenya, they did not acquire it legally. Now, when we remove morality from the context. And I disagree. I strongly disagree when you say the only objective morality is rooted in God, because I hate using in my arguments, if anybody that knows me knows, I don't like to use the word right or wrong, because right and wrong are only right and wrong to only the person that decides what is right and wrong gets to decide. And why? Because it serves their self-interest. So morality being rooted in God and being defined by Christianity or God will serve the interest of God, wanting the people he created to be obedient and follow his word. So even that is not objective, because it's the entity or the school serving its interests, right? Because now if atheism comes in the perspective and that morality does not serve their interest, it's still not objective, right? Because there's still some form of bias. So for as long as there's bias, there's no objectivity. And you said, well, yes, Christians, and I agree, Christians did fight for the abolition of slave trade. But I'd like to ask you, Ben, if I slap you, okay, and I like analogies, I feel like they get the point across quite easy. If I slap you and then I slap you with dust or like flour or something, and I wipe it, do I really get flowers that I did that I undid the mess I should have not created in the first place? Because if you look at colonization, we could argue the first subtle form of colonization was when the missionaries came to learn the lands, learn the language, learn the people. And that's why it intrigues me why the Bible was it's actually, I could argue, it's the only book that the whites brought and translated it into so many languages. What did it have that they needed for us to learn? Because if it was about they had our interest at heart, there's so many books they could have translated. So, and while you say Christianity dignifies and gives community, I agree. But it's Christianity gives with one hand while taking with the other. That's what I do not like. Yes, it dignifies, it gives you community, but at the same time, when you're being told happy at the poor, when you go to a pastor as a woman and for your abusive marriage, and he's telling you have to persevere because mwanamke ni mvumilivu. So while it dignifies you, you get some social status in the society. It takes more than it gives. That's my problem with it. And of course, there are exceptions to the rule as always, but that seems to be the norm. So that's all.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. I think that was a very interesting conversation, and we've just finished the rebuttals. And just a second. I think we can all just have our video on, because now we just want to respond to the questions. So even Michelle, you can have your video on. So we have some questions on the YouTube live stream, and it seems most of them are actually for the Christian side. But so there's this comment. Wait, let me get to the questions first, not the comments. So there's a question, I guess this is for Ben, on the fact that you said that slave masters took scripture out of context. And so they would like you to explain what Leviticus 25:44 means. And so I think I can even just read it for you so that you don't have to look for it. So Leviticus 25:44 says, your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. So that's Leviticus 25:44. And so the question is like, if the problem was taking scripture out of context, how do you interpret Leviticus 25:44?
Okay. Can you guys get me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I think when talking about that verse, we need to look at the context of that verse. So I will say that that verse, that is verse 44, discusses slaves that they may already have slaves that they may already have from nations around them. So they can actually be bought and sold. It doesn't say to seek them out or have forced slavery. Hence, it is not giving an endorsement of seeking new slaves or encouraging the slave trade. But at this point, the Israelite has just come out of slavery and about to enter the Holy Land. So they shouldn't have had many servants. Also, this doesn't restrict other people in cultures around them from selling themselves as bond servants. And I also think that is a point that is important for us to have. Yeah.
Okay. Michelle, I don't know if you'd like to make a 15-second comment on that, or we just go to the next question?
So we have to look it at the context.
Okay. First off, in this regard, context really does not matter, at least to me, but that's out of personal bias, okay? But number two is if religion has the power, or if the Bible has the power, and we've seen it done, to hinder people from doing such stuff, okay? We've seen it tell you if you do these things, you're going to hell. And because the consequences are so dire, they get to your head. In business, we call it negative motivation, right? So why not dissuade people totally by saying, do not have them. If you already have them, get them, take people, give them their freedom. Because I could argue that's a way of, I could call it a loophole of letting people, quote unquote, misbehave in a very dangerously inhuman way. Because if your boss sees you misbehaving and is like, you're already misbehaving, might as well continue, but usifanye tena. He's already, in fact, we could argue, or we could deduce from that it's a partial agreement, or at least it's enabling. So that's where I'm coming from.
Okay. And let's try to make these responses brief so that we can be able to get to all the questions. So there's this is more of a comment. I guess maybe Michelle could comment on this if she knows about it. Or okay. I think if you do, it will take some time to finish the other questions in the chat. Okay. So like I was feeling maybe Michelle, you could so there's a comment here on the story of William Wilberforce. So it's a book by a guy called Eric Metaxas. So it's a very interesting read. Eric Metaxas. So he's written a book called The Story of William Wilberforce. So I don't know if you know anything about that. You could comment on it. If not, maybe Ben could comment on it.
No, I am unaware, but I'm noting it down. So let me write it down. The Theory of Wilberforce. Okay.
I don't know if Ben, you'd like to comment on it. Just a short comment.
Okay. I think I had mentioned this, that William Wilberforce was a parliamentarian, and it was during this period that slave trade was actually happening. And before he became a Christian, actually he had no problem with slave trade. And so when he actually became a Christian at that time, he saw the evil of slave trade, and he's the one who began the motion of abolishing slave trade. And so, and he fought to the end. I think that was in 1803, where the parliament now approved the abolition of slave trade. But again, I think it was implemented around 1833, around there. But I think the point is his motivations for fighting for the abolition of slave trade, and his argument was actually is that all human beings are made in the image and likeness of God, and therefore slavery is wrong. Yeah.
All right, thanks for that. There's another question here. I think I will combine them because we are so out of time, and this is for Ben. So there's a question of, we have Exodus 21:7, Exodus 21:21, Ephesians 6:5, and they also went back to the Leviticus 25, and so they're asking why should those verses advocate for any human being to be enslaved? So I think that's the main thrust of the question. And also, I want to combine questions, so that we can try to just summarize our response. And then nowadays, if you can talk about the slave Bible Africans were forced to read. And also there's this comment on that we should not make excuses for the Bible because it was brought to divide and conquer. And then Africans are excusing it, and it's sad that Africans are excusing the Bible, which is encouraging slavery. So there are those about excusing the Bible, the slave Bible, Africans, Black people are given, and then the verses that talk about slaves obeying your masters. Yeah. So if you can just give a response to that, and then Nekesa can respond, and then we'll just get to the final statement.
So I may not really have time to get into explaining those verses in depth because I think the misunderstanding is, as I had mentioned before, is that I can do all things through verses taken out of context. And if we really don't engage the scriptures in their own context, we will misinterpret them, just as the white men did. Now, I'm not trying to excuse the Bible, really. I am saying, but the point that I made is that the Bible was used for bad reasons. Okay, and one of the things that we also have to appreciate that before the coming of the white man, Christianity was actually in Africa for 1,000 years. So we can't really say that it is actually the white man who brought Christianity to Africa, because it was in existence for 1,000 years before the coming of any white man. So I'm not trying to excuse the Bible. The point that I'm making is that the misuse of the Bible doesn't negate its own truth. And also, another thing that I would like to point out is when Paul is talking in the context of slaves, obey your masters, we should read the whole chapter and understand what Paul is saying. So when Paul is saying, slaves, obey your masters, down there he says, I don't know if I can really get it to read it for you. But down there he also talks to masters, and he tells that the masters are supposed to treat their slaves with respect, because first they are answerable to the Lord. And Matthew Paul is actually talking to people who are believers. And I think another good example to mention will be the story of Philemon and this servant, I'm forgetting the name, Onesimus. And so Onesimus was a runaway slave who had done quite a lot of things to Philemon. But now Paul, after Onesimus gets born again, now Paul writes to Philemon and tells Philemon, this guy has actually gotten born again. Please receive him as your brother. And also another thing is, when we read all these verses, I don't have time to get into specific details of them. We can have another time for that. But when you read these verses, especially in Exodus and Leviticus, one of the things you will see God telling them, that one of the things that will happen to a person who first kidnaps someone and then sells them to slavery, they're supposed to be beaten to death. And then God also tells them that it is forbidden for someone to be able to actually beat their slaves to death. And that had serious implications of the person being killed and punished for mistreating their slaves. Another thing that is important to mention is that we ought not to forget the issue of people selling themselves into slavery because they had debts they had to pay. So they sold themselves into slavery, and so they worked as a way of paying their debt. But even so, God required them to treat the slaves with respect, because he actually tells them that, remember that you were slaves in Egypt, therefore treat the slaves with respect and dignity.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, thanks for that response. And I think, Michelle, if you can, maybe if you just have a response, you can, but I would prefer if we get to final statements. If it's a response, maybe like literally a 15-second response.
Yeah, that's even too much. I won't need it. But there's a part Ben says God tells masters to treat their slaves with respect. And I think that's counterproductive. It beats the point of being a slave, right? Because being a slave in its nature is already as disrespectful as it gets. There's no slavery and respect cannot coexist, at least not in terms of the slave context. Because it's okay, the master demanding respect, but the slave is you're already dehumanized. You're not seen worthy. You're literally a dog. A dog even has more parts than you. So it's counterproductive to say that you can treat a slave with respect. By making them a slave, there's no respect you're already giving them. So thank you.
All right. And thanks again, guys, for joining us. We've come to the end now. We just want to get into a 1-minute summary. So like literally 1 minute for both Michelle and Ben to tell us. So in summary, what are we supposed to take away from this in terms of what led to the transatlantic slave trade, what the consequences are, and even most importantly, how do we move on? Or maybe we can't move on. Maybe not being able to move on is also a response. So we could start with Ben, just 1 minute to tell us how did we get to the transatlantic slave trade, what has it done, and what's the way forward. So when you start speaking, I'll time the minute.
Okay. All right, I think I had already mentioned it in the presentation, that what drove the transatlantic slave trade, the reasons were purely economic and political. They were not religious. And as much as people used the Bible, and there was also the other aspect of the Muslims coming in later, as much as people used the Bible to justify slavery, it doesn't negate the truth of Christianity to begin with. So while we accept that what our own brothers did, our own Africans did in enslaving our own people and then selling them out there, that one is totally unagreeable. And I think it is a shame for us to do that to our very own brothers. And also the point that I want us to take away from this is this. Thus, in transatlantic slave trade was wrong by itself. Only because human beings have got a dignity accorded to them by no one else but God. And they are wrong only because morality is objective and morality must be transcendent. And so as we move forward, one of the things that I want us to do is to agree that this was actually wrong, whatever they did to us. The reality is we really may not be able to move from those effects of transatlantic slave trade. They already happened, but while that one happened, we still have some modern forms of slavery which are there, and I think Michelle alluded to that, which is actually present today. It is a shame that it is even in the African soil, but I said this has to be fought by every niche and every strength that we have. It is not justifiable. And so thank you. Thank you, Michelle, for coming up for this discussion. I think I've enjoyed it. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Michelle. Now you can give us a minute of your summary.
Thank you, Ben. And I agree with a few things you've said. Of course, it was wrong. I don't want to use the law of deduction here, but I have to. You just said it is only wrong on the basis that it does not align with the morality accorded by God, which makes me ask, as a not only as a secretary of a very on the opposite end of the spectrum of atheists in Kenya. So if that was not the case, if it had it aligned by God, then would that have been okay? And I think what we can do first is we have to be angry. And it sounds extreme, but I hope as Africans we need to be angry of this, of how we are treated, of how we've been treated by the world. Because let's be honest, and even Ben has said it, it did not start with us, and it will most certainly not end with us. 1,500 years later, and 300 years when we've come up and we are the stronger race, or we are the stronger continent, we would most probably have the propensity to be just as worse as our masters. Because case in point, I remember, was it Senegal, when France took Senegalese slaves from France, where they had transported them, and brought them back to lead Senegal, and they were worse. They were more cruel than the masters. So if we read history, or if we just look at patterns, if we use pattern recognition models, we can almost certainly tell. Sorry?
10 seconds. 10 seconds left.
Oh, okay. So we need to get angry, number one, and we need to not do to ourselves what has been done to us long enough. Because as there's a famous James Baldwin interview in the 70s, I'm not sure which exact year, where he says, when something is done to you effectively enough, you do it to yourself. So we've been tumeteswa sana, or suffering has been so perpetuated to us that we are now doing it to ourselves. It's like saying when life is so used to giving you lemonades, you're not giving you lemons, you're not giving yourself lemons. So there's a part we're playing in this, and we should. If the world is already making us suffer, why are we part of it? Why are we also making ourselves suffer some? So individually, societally, communally, make better political choices, make better economic empowerment. Let's take care of our women, our children, our society, our villages, and together we either rise together or we will fall together. That is clear as day. Not to perpetuate Pan-Africanism agenda, but at some point we'll have to unite or literally die, for lack of more calming words. So that's it.
All right. Thanks a lot for that final statement. And I guess before we log out, there are actually so this is session 3 of the Black Lives Matter session in the African Debates YouTube channel. So just for those who have joined in, so actually session 1 was on slavery. It actually went deeper in the topic of slavery. Here, I guess it was more broader into the actual transatlantic slave trade. So I guess if you'd like to see how we discussed the issue of slavery, you can look at that. And then there's also session 2 about women, and somehow Black Lives Matter also is related to that. And then now this was session 3, and we will continue with further sessions on this issue of the slave trade. I mean, Black Lives Matter. And also as well, just wanted to shout out some friends of the page, or at least some inspiration. So there's this organization from South Africa called Ratio Christi, ratiochristi.co.za. So they have some information in apologetics that you can look at. That's from South Africa. And then also another one based in East Africa that is known as the Africa Center for Apologetics Research. And so that's here. So that's acfar.org, but it deals more with cults. And so these are some of the organizations that inspire some of these conversations. So you can look up all that. Yeah, but apart from that, we've come to the end. And I guess for those on YouTube, I guess you can just hit, you can stop watching. But yeah, for those here, we can also log out. And I guess we will see one another in the next session of African Debates. You can like, subscribe, share, and let's keep talking. Thanks for showing up today, and have a good evening. And happy Easter.
All right.
For those celebrating.
All right, Michelle, we should catch up for a cup of tea.
And talk about Africanism, and yeah, of course, no problem. Have more progressive
conversations.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, and yeah, this was good.
Yeah.